Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the PlayStation 2, and specifically, essentially how to hack it, sort of. It's an old method, but, you know, tried and true. We'll go over it. Before we get into that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that before, as well as check me out on all the social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc., as well as my new channel called Flying and Eating, which is about adventuring around the world, flying and eating stuff. It's pretty cool. Now, back to this. So the PlayStation 2, history's by far most popular, highest selling console ever produced. Has been around for a long time. A lot of people love it. A lot of people want to play it. But as time is going on, the console is starting to show its age a bit. Disk drives are starting to fail, and there are methods out there by which you can run games off the hard drive and save the console from ever truly dying on you. Well, hopefully, anyway. Now, what I'm about to talk about is not news. Like, this method has actually existed for, like, 15 years. It's just that at the time in which I'm making this video, there have been some improvements over the years, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to revisit this old method and the ways it's been upgraded and just kind of talk about it. So the core idea at the end of the day, what we're going to be doing here is, without actually hacking the console itself, we're going to be able to run an SSD off of it with every game we want and just have them boot natively. Sounds pretty cool, right? And it'll allow it to play imports and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of fun. And if you decide you don't like it, you haven't really harmed your console at all. You can just take stuff right out and it's back to the original stock version. So in order to do this, we're gonna talk all about all the details, but you're gonna need a few things. The first thing you're gonna need is a memory card. One specifically with software installed on it called FreeMcBoot. Now, I did an entire video on FreeMcBoot. We'll get back to the details of that, but that is an essential. Second, you're going to need a modem device for the PlayStation 2. There are two different options. This is the one that Sony themselves made. This goes on the back of the console, allowing it to connect to hard drive. This is a newer one by a company called RGeek. This is the one I recommend for reasons we'll get into later. These cost about $20. And then the last thing you're going to need is a new hard drive or an SSD. I personally picked up an HP SSD. This is a 512 gigabyte model. Also, technically, you're going to need a way to connect that to a computer. This is just a SATA to USB cable, but you will need that as well. So those are the basic ingredients. Now let's get started on the details. So the memory card here, as I mentioned, it uses something called FreeMcBoot. Now what FreeMcBoot is basically an exploit for the console. Back in the day when Sony designed the PlayStation 2, they wanted to give themselves the option to be able to do firmware updates. But back then, the only real reliable way to do that, oddly enough, was through the memory card slot. So the logic was that if Sony put out some sort of game that needed an update, they would actually pack the update into the game, send the file to your memory card, then your memory card could run it, and then from there, update the system. They only used it like once to my knowledge, which was specifically for the DVD drive. You could get a small update, and I think that was packed in with some demo disc at some point. I don't remember them ever using it beyond that. However, the community eventually figured out, oh man, we can exploit that, and they did. What was born of that was software known as FreeMcBoot. FreeMcBoot basically tricks the PlayStation 2 into running stuff it's not supposed to run. And thus a lot of different programs can be added to that would allow the PS2 to essentially do all kinds of things. However, it doesn't stay on the PlayStation 2. The second you remove the memory card, the console goes right back to being stock. Hence, this is not a permanent hack, but if you just leave the memory card in there at all times, you're good to go. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you how to install FreeMcBoot because I never did it myself. What I did is I found a guy on eBay years ago who was selling the cards for $5 with FreeMcBoot already pre-installed, so I just bought one. So there are videos and tutorials out there on how to get FreeMcBoot installed on the card. Possibly you yourself can find a card to buy that's already been pre-installed. I don't know anymore, but yeah, that is an essential piece. If you can't do that, the rest of this doesn't work. So make sure you have that. It's also best to kind of update it to the latest version. Mine is not up to date, but it will still suffice for the purposes of this demonstration. Moving on. After that's done, the next thing you need, as I said, is one of these modem devices. Now, as I mentioned, this is the one that Sony themselves made. This one's kind of funny because Sony put this out as a broadband modem for the PlayStation 2. I don't know how many people remember this, But back in the day, Sony was making big claims about how the PlayStation 2 would be like a home computer. You won't even need a PC. You won't even need it because the PS2 can do everything. We're going to release all that stuff. Of course, like that big slot on the back, by the way, that you maybe have never really paid much attention to, that's for a hard drive specifically. That's what it's there for. They're like, we're going to give you a modem, we're going to give you a hard drive, you're going to have internet access, you can do all that stuff. Famously, that never really happened. It barely materialized. They did ultimately, obviously, release it, most notably as like a Final Fantasy type of bundle. It would come with the, this as well as a hard drive and I think a copy of the game. I don't really remember what the bundle specifics were, allowing for online support and a hard drive. The hard drive would function as expanded memory. I think the original hard drive was like 40 gigabytes. Nothing significant today, but that was what happened of that. Now, people figured out once FreeMcBoot was running, that you were able to use this thing as a device to allow the PlayStation 2 to recognize a hard drive and thus read games off said hard drive. See where this is going? Now the problem with this particular one though, the original Sony model, is this was designed for IDE technology. IDE hard drives are incredibly antiquated. They were not out of date completely by the time this was released, but right on the cusp of it, because the next thing around the corner was SATA, and SATA was right about to happen if it hadn't already technically occurred somewhere. So this is borderline useless today in that regard. But a company called RGeek stepped in and basically made an updated version of the exact same device. Now the irony of this is they straight up just removed the modem ports. This no longer has the broadband port or the 56K port. This is straight up just a hard drive adapter, but the key difference is they got rid of the useless IDE port and replaced it with a SATA port, thus allowing a much more modern hard drive to function, which is awesome. You can get these online for about $20, usually on eBay. I think Alibaba and companies like that sell these, but I found this in a junk store in Seattle. That's actually the whole reason we're making this video, because I just thought it would be fun to talk about this. But yes, this is an essential piece as well. After that, it is recommended that you get a good hard drive to go with it. I personally recommend an SSD. What I got here is a 512 gigabyte SSD by Hewlett-Packard. Now, you can get whatever you prefer. I simply like SSDs because they don't make any noise. There's no moving parts. They're more reliable. I know people out there are like, no, but mechanical laptop drives are reliable. No, I hate mechanical hard drives. You know how many SSDs I've had fail on me in my life? 0. You know how many mechanical drives I've had fail on me in my life? A lot. That's what happens when you expose yourself to additional moving parts and complications that don't need to exist. But SSDs, even though I'm fully aware, and I know the million people talking about in the comments, I'm fully aware the PlayStation 2 cannot utilize the full speed benefits of an SSD. Hell, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 cannot do that. I understand. But they will still get benefits out of it. The SSD has no seek times. It is more reliable. Like I said, runs cooler. All these, there are benefits there. The one argument against it was always, well, mechanical drives are cheaper. Absolutely true. But also in this point in time, kind of pointless. You know how much this cost? $40 for 512 gigabyte SSD. Now, that's not bad at all, especially because of the limitations of the PlayStation 2 itself. The PS2 maximum hard drive capability, technically, and that's key, is 2 terabytes. However, to the vast majority of you, you're only going to be able to use a 1 terabyte drive, which we'll explain in a bit. So, really doesn't matter anymore. The other thing to factor in is the size of the PS2 library. People underestimate the PlayStation 2 library is gargantuan. It's like 5,000 titles. It's incredibly big. So even if you could get a full 2 terabyte hard drive to work on it, that's going to make a dent in that collection, provided you're trying to get a full set. What you really want to do with the PlayStation 2 is have a curated set. Or if you're so inclined, you could get multiple hard drives and just kind of swap them out. That would work as well. That's up to you. But for our purposes, we're just going to set up one and show it in action. My own personal collection has been curated and thrown onto this. Every game I own easily fits onto this hard drive with like 200 gigabytes spare. Keep in mind, most PlayStation 2 games are about a gigabyte or 2. There are some that, a lot of them just cap out at 4. There's a handful of games that use the dual layer functionality, so they get up to like 5 or 6 gigs, but the majority are around the 1 or 2 gigabyte sweet spot. So a 512 gigabyte hard drive will hold a very significant chunk of games, like literally a few hundred. So unless you just are putting everything on just for the sake of putting everything on, realistically, that will suffice. And that drive, again, $40. So for $60, you can essentially, which was the price of a brand new retail game back in the day, you can essentially have every PlayStation 2 game you ever realistically wanted all set to go. So now we're going to talk about actually like formatting it, and that's where this limitation comes in. So if you are going to set this up, there is a bit of an issue. The best program that was ever made for this purpose is a software called WinHip. Now, WinHip is archaic. It is like 15 years old, but it is still probably the best one ever made as far as the user experience, because it's very clean, it runs very well, it does its job very efficiently, and you don't have to be that tech savvy to follow the instructions. Now, it is technically possible to format a drive into 2 terabytes and 2 terabyte drive and have it work. That gets complicated because no cleaner software, to my knowledge, has ever been produced to that end. There are like batch file programs and things like that that are more complicated, like to get it to run. It can be done. I want that very clear. It is not impossible to have that done, but it's something the vast majority of people are probably going to find a little too complicated. So for our purposes, we'll stick with WinHip, and we'll stick with a 512 gigabyte SSD. I'll put a link in the description to WinHip. You can go and find it. It's freeware. It's not hard to use. So when you get the SSD and you've set all that up, you install WinHip. You want to connect the SSD. Make sure it's I would suggest a brand new hard drive or a brand new solid state drive, just because it's fresh and you're not worried about it. Because whatever you do, the drive will be formatted. You will lose every bit of data that's on it. So make sure this is a dedicated drive specifically for this purpose. Connect it to your computer. It does not matter if the computer recognizes it right away or not. It's irrelevant. It's going to get formatted again. So run WinHip, but specifically run it as administrator, which means you right-click on it, open it up that way. Otherwise, the program might have some issues running. Once it's open, it will probably yell at you and say, like, I don't see any PS2 hard drives connected, man. And you're like, yeah, I know, that's why we're here. So you just confirm that you understand the error. It doesn't matter. Then you're going to go up to the upper left corner and click on Select Drive, and there's going to list every hard drive you have connected to your computer. This is essential. You must click on the one that is definitely 100% the drive you intended to use for this. Do not screw this up, because if you do, you will accidentally format the wrong drive, and there's no reversing that. So be 1000% sure you are clicking on the correct drive. Once you have selected the correct drive, it will once again prompt you with an error screen saying, hey dude, there's no PS2 boot record here, which is true, there isn't, but we're about to correct that. So in order to do that, you'll see an option at the bottom that says Format Drive. Click on that, and then a little window will populate. That window, basically, most of the things on there don't really matter, but one thing that does is a drop tab. If your hard drive is bigger than 128 gigabytes, you must set this drop tab to 48-bit. If it's less than 128 gigabytes, then you keep it to whatever the setting is below 48 bits. Now, at this point in time when I'm making this video, I can't imagine anyone would only want to put a 128 gigabyte drive in this thing, given how cheap and readily available they are, but technically that's what would be different. So in most cases, go with the 48-bit for your hard drive there. Then it'll be just follow the sequence of like, do you want to format it? Yes, I do. Are you really sure you want to format it? Yes, I do. And it will format. That process only takes a moment or so. Now the hard drive is good to go. So you're going to use WinHip to add games. This is the fun part. However, there's a few different options here. It is worth understanding that I myself am the type of person that when I get any sort of disk-based game, I archive that disk to a computer. I do so partially for reasons like this, so the ISOs are ready to go if I need them, but also to verify disks. I've made entire videos on this, but when you basically buy a disk-based game, if you get it to boot on the console, that doesn't actually mean the disk is good. It just means it was good enough to start. So when you rip a disk to a computer, that's how you verify every single sector on the disk, and thus the disk is, not damaged in any way, shape, or form. So I've talked about that all in a different video, but yeah, I pre-archived all my things. So all my disk images, you say add images, they're all there. I was good to go. However, most people do not do that. So at this point, you have a few different choices. One, if you have actual PlayStation 2 discs, you can choose to archive them, rip them yourselves for this purpose if you want. That's easy. There's software out there called ImageBurn. It's freeware software. You would go get that, you download it, install it, and on that software there's an option that says like rip disk to ISO. PS2 discs have no copy protection on the discs themselves. Therefore, any DVD-ROM or Blu-ray drive will be able to read it. But of course, you require having a DVD-ROM or Blu-ray drive. And as an old man, it's weird to me to think that people don't have those. But yes, it's very common not to have those anymore. But regardless, that would obviously be required. If you do not want to archive them in advance of this process, you just kind of want to do this at a one-at-a-time basis, WinHip actually has you covered there. Again, if you have a disk drive, WinHip has this option that says when you go to add images, there's a second thing down there that says like rip it or add image, and then it shows like your disk drive letter. That basically would just have your computer rip a PS2 disk directly to this hard drive. I don't really recommend this method as it allows for more potential for errors, but it is an option if you don't want to do the additional steps. That is a thing. Alternatively, as I imagine majority of you out there would do, you can set sail to the high seas of the internet and find your games that way. Regardless of how you do it, the point here is you have to add the images to the hard drive. So in my case, I just hit add images, all my games populated, I just grabbed them all, hit OK, and told it to transfer. Now, it's possible, like once you tell it to do that, it'll start going. It actually goes surprisingly quickly, again, depending on how you have it connected. In the case of the SSD, it was like flying. But once it was all done, it actually told me there was a couple of errors, and I thought, oh no. So I looked at the log. You might see errors too. What happens is sometimes if you have a game with like, two games with a similar file name, I think in my case I had like Phantasy Star Generations 1 and 2, it would not put the second game on because it thought it was the first game. There was some weird error like that, which was kind of whatever. There's sometimes, when you rip the dual layer games, I remember Gran Turismo 4 I did a rip, and the only way it would produce a successful rip of an ISO is it also had to throw on, I think it was an MDS file, which was essentially unnecessary, but it tried to put both on there and it freaked out, so it wouldn't put the MDS file on. Small things like that. For the vast majority of cases, your thing will be fine, but I recommend looking through the log if it mentions any sort of error. Just to boil that down. In my case, all the errors were harmless. So anyway, all the games get transferred over, and you're essentially good to go. You close the program, you exit, you eject the hard drive, and then you reach the state we're at right now. So this hard drive is all set up and good to go, and I'm going to show you in real time what we actually do here. So we take our little docking bay here, and you just physically connect it, and it just sits there. It is worth noting, while I don't have it, this method is obviously it looks ridiculous. Like the size is just so off, especially since compared to the size of the PlayStation 2's hard drive bay. But if you want to secure this, there are actually 3D printed little molds that exist. You could set up and actually put on there to give it more strength, as it were. I don't have that, but it does exist. Maybe I'll get one of those later, but for the purposes of this demonstration, it is totally unnecessary. This is good to go. So at that point, you just kind of sit it right here in the back of the console, and you just plug it in. Now, I would recommend tightening the screws right here in the back. Again, for the demonstration, I'm not going to do that, but you can do that if this is like a long-term thing. So at that point, you're going to want to turn everything on and see it in action. So I just fired up my power supply thing, and we can now start running the console. And it should boot relatively quickly into the screen here whenever it feels like playing along. There it is. Okay, so on that monitor, you can see that I've got Free McBoot running here. Let me grab my, this is the Retro Fighters wireless PlayStation 2 controller. And so Free McBoot boots up, and it says what version it is. Again, mine's out of date, but it has a whole bunch of different options. Now, what we're just going to go with, I mentioned there's two different loading software. There's HD Loader, and further down there is Open PS2 Loader. Either one will work. It's good to have both, and the reason for that is you have to keep in mind the PlayStation 2 was not meant to run games this way. This is an exploit. So it's possible you'll run into games that run on one piece of software and don't run on the other. The vast majority of games will run on both, but think of it kind of like a Venn diagram. They mostly overlap, but there's just a couple of games on the outside that work on one or the other. So I personally prefer HD Loader, so that's what we're going to go with. So you just go ahead and open that. Now, the first time you open up HD Loader, it'll say loading. This screen might take an eternity for you. It might even seem like it froze. Now, in my case, it didn't, but in your case, it might the first time. What it's doing is that it's generating and populating that entire list, and the first time you do that, it will take a while. Don't freak out, don't worry, just leave it alone. It'll get to this screen. The only reason this one went so quickly is because I've already done that in advance just in the interest of time. But every time you, keep in mind, every time you update it, that same thing will happen. So if you were like, okay, I'm done with the PS2 today. Oh man, I got some new games. I'm going to go rip them and install them there and then put them in and run HD loader. It's once again going to take a long time. It just, you understand. So we have a whole list of games there. Now, this is important to note. I think this is interesting. Technically, if your PlayStation 2 still has operational disk drives, and keep in mind the PS2 has 2 disk drives. It has the DVD lens and, well, not disk drives, it has 2 lenses. It has the DVD lens and it has the CD lens. It's very common for one or the other or even both to go and stop working. However, if yours work, you can actually use HD Loader to rip the disks natively right onto the hard drive. Basically the way that works is, imagine you followed every step we've done up to this point except the part where you added the games. Instead, you said, I want the PlayStation 2 to do that. You would get to this screen and there'd be no games listed. But on the side, you can actually see it says things like install and all that. Provided the disk drive works, you can just go ahead and tell it to install and it'll rip directly. I really do not recommend that method though, only because A, you're wearing out the disk drive, B, it's very annoying to type out titles and stuff on the actual PS2. And C, it takes a really long time. The disk read speed on a DVD-ROM or a Blu-ray ROM drive can be like up to 32x. You know, like it can be, you know, now you're playing with power back there, 32x. I didn't intentionally made that reference, but whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the PlayStation 2 will rip it at like 500 kilobits. Like it's a very different read speed. So I wouldn't recommend it, but technically if you just don't have access to the good toys, you could do it this way. But yeah, from there, you basically just pick whatever game you want and you see it running. Now, as I mentioned before, now the console is essentially region free. The region coding is bypassed. It doesn't care anymore. So it'll play the Japanese stuff. It'll play all the American stuff. It'll play all the European stuff. Whatever you got, it should run it, provided that the game itself is compatible with that particular software. So I'm going to just put on, I can barely see what I'm looking at. Blood Will Tell. We're going to put that on because that's a very rare game. I remember buying that back when nobody cared. But now the other benefit of this is that the load times are substantially better than they are off the disc. And they're now, again, it's also an SSD. So it's, the PS2 is like maxed, you know, like absolutely maxed to its maximum speed potential, which is nice. Which is, yeah, I mean, that's, guys, honestly, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's not that complicated. It's a relatively simple thing to do. Most stuff works, and it's a great way to preserve your actual disc-based collection while still enjoying your PlayStation 2 games. The funny thing about this, though, is that, I'm going to turn this off just in the interest of noise. The funny thing about all this, and oh yeah, you should turn it off every time you're done with the game and then turn it back on, do a fresh start. I can actually show you the intro screen to Free McBoot. The funny thing is, I really just did this for you guys. Like, I only bought this stuff just to make the video. This isn't even how I personally would run PS2 games. I do them through a hacked fat PS3, just because of the additional benefits that come with that. But this is a very good method if you're the guy out there who has a PS2 laying around, you want to try some other stuff, you really don't want to break the bank on things, whatever your reasoning is. This is awesome. It also, again, has the intended benefits of, like, if you do own a nice collection, you can completely digitally archive it here. You can play them. You can have the additional benefits of the speeds and all that sort of stuff without necessarily harming or degrading your collection. So this has a wide array of perks. But yeah, again, OpenPL or Open PlayStation Loader, whatever it's called, also works. There's just no real reason to show it. It functionally does exactly the same thing. So yeah, that'll about do it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys could do me a favor, you know, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that already, as well as check me out on social media stuff. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, the new channel, Flying and Eating. Please, I appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.